This is HOA busted. And yes, the records really vanished. Karen stood by the mailbox cluster shouting that my name was back on the violation list and she was proud of it. "You are going to regret that attitude," she said, waving a glove box envelope of certified slips like it was a warrant. I work mobile detailing out of my driveway in Buffalo, and the last thing I need is the Quarry Ridge HOA Incorporated threatening my access again. Laura Sanchez, pool and amenities chair, had that look on her face like she had just won a prize. I kept my phone in my pocket, already recording, because I knew this was about to get worse. She slapped the envelope against her palm and leaned in close. "I decide what counts as compliant, not you." Her voice carried across the parking area, and I saw two neighbors slow down near their cars to watch. I stayed quiet, arms crossed, roll of caution tape looped over one wrist because I had been marking off my work zone all morning. The hazy smoke from someone's grill drifted between us, and the whole scene felt like it was being staged for an audience. Laura pulled out a single sheet from the envelope and held it up, no readable text visible, but the shape was unmistakable. A violation notice. "This is the third one," she said. "You ignored the first two, so now we are escalating." I did not ignore anything. I resolved this 2 years ago. "I have the approval letter." She shook her head, pixie cut catching the afternoon light, white cardigan spotless like she had dressed for a photo op. "There is no approval letter in the system." I checked myself. "You are making things up to avoid accountability." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice level. "I have a signed approval from the property manager dated April 2023. I submitted it in person, and I got a receipt." Laura tilted her head, fake concern spreading across her face. "Then you should have no problem producing it at the hearing next week. Until then, you are non-compliant, and the fines start tomorrow. $50 a day. I can fine you daily until you give up and you cry," she added, voice rising on the last word like she was daring me to react. A neighbor near the trash enclosure stopped mid-step and stared. Laura did not even glance at them. She just tucked the envelope back under her arm and walked toward her car, pink visor bobbing with each step. I stood there for a moment, letting her words settle. $50 a day. That would be $1,500 a month if she dragged this out, and I am in the middle of a renovation schedule where delays could cost me thousands in lost client bookings. I needed my driveway clear and accessible, and Laura knew it. She had always known it. This was not about compliance, this was about control. I pulled out my phone, stopped the recording, and sent a copy to my cloud backup. Then I opened my files and found the approval letter. It was right there, April 18, 2023, signed by the property manager at the time. Clear language approving my mobile detailing setup as long as I followed noise and hour restrictions. I had followed every rule. I scrolled further and found the receipt from the day I submitted it, time-stamped and scanned. Everything was clean. But something about Laura's confidence bothered me. She said she checked the system herself. That meant either the letter was gone or she was lying about checking. I walked back to my townhouse, unlocked the front door, and grabbed my laptop. I logged into the HOA portal and navigated to my compliance history. The page loaded slowly, and when it finally came up, my stomach dropped. There were 3 new violations listed, all dated within the last 2 weeks. Each one referenced my driveway setup. Each one had a different compliance officer's signature, but the wording was identical, almost copy-pasted. I clicked on the attached documents and found 0 evidence of the original approval. It was just gone, deleted, archived, or buried somewhere I could not access. I sat back in my chair and stared at the screen. This was not an accident. I grabbed my phone and called my contractor, Mike, who had been working with me on client referrals for the last year. He picked up on the second ring. "What is going on?" he said. I need you to pull the photos you took the day Laura tried to block your truck in my driveway last summer. Do you still have those? He paused, then I heard clicking in the background. Yeah, I have them. Timestamps and GPS tags. Why? Because Laura just told me I have no approval on file and she is threatening daily fines. I think she wiped the records. Mike let out a low whistle. She did this before, you know. What do you mean? He hesitated, then said, a neighbor on the north side paid a fine 3 years ago just to make her stop. He told me about it when I was doing his deck. Said Laura kept changing the requirements until he gave up. He regrets it now because she used that precedent to hit 2 other people the same way. That was the moment I knew this was bigger than my driveway. Laura had a system. She targeted people who could not afford to fight back, changed the rules mid-argument, and weaponized the compliance process until they either paid or moved. And if someone like me pushed back, she just erased the evidence. I thanked Mike and hung up. Then I opened a new document on my laptop. I started writing down everything I could remember: dates, notices, approvals, conversations, witnesses. I labeled it Cold Case, Quarry Ridge Compliance Fraud. Because that is exactly what this was. A cold case. Something that happened before, something that got buried, and something that was happening again right now. I spent the next 2 hours digging through my email. I found the original submission confirmation from April 2023, sent to the old property manager's address. I found the reply email with the approval letter attached. I found a follow-up from June 2023, where I asked for clarification on the noise restrictions, and got a response confirming I was fully compliant. All of it still in my inbox, untouched. I exported every email, saved the PDFs, and added them to a new folder labeled Evidence Pack 1. Then I logged into the HOA portal again and took screenshots of the current violation entries. I noticed something strange. All 3 violations had creation timestamps within a 2-hour window last Tuesday afternoon. That was the same day Laura had sent a mass email to the board about enforcement priorities. I checked the board minutes from that meeting and found a mention of compliance review, but no vote, no discussion, no specifics. Just a note that said ongoing enforcement actions were approved by consensus. That phrase, ongoing enforcement actions, felt wrong. I pulled up the bylaws and searched for the term. It did not exist anywhere in the governing documents. There was a section on compliance enforcement, but it required a board vote for any fine over $25 and written notice at least 10 days before the fine was applied. Laura's $50 daily fine violated both rules. I added that to my notes. Then I printed the relevant bylaw pages and clipped them into a binder. I was building a case, and I needed it to be airtight. Because if Laura could erase my approval, she could erase anything. And if she had done this before, there had to be a trail. I decided to reach out to the neighbor Mike had mentioned, the one who paid the fine 3 years ago. I did not know his name, but Mike gave me the address, North Side, 3rd unit from the corner. I drove over that evening, parked near the curb, and knocked on the door. A man in his 50s answered, cautious but polite. I introduced myself, mentioned Mike, and asked if he had a few minutes to talk about the HOA. His expression shifted immediately, guarded but interested. "You are dealing with Laura," he said. It was not a question. I nodded. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "Keep your voice down. She has friends in every building." He told me his story in quick, clipped sentences. 3 years ago, Laura hit him with a landscaping violation. He had planted new shrubs that met the approved species list, but she claimed they were too tall. He showed her the list. She said the list was outdated and the new standard was shorter plants. He asked to see the new standard. She said it was not published yet, but the board had approved it verbally. He requested a hearing. She scheduled it for a weekday morning when he could not take off work. He missed it. She issued a $100 fine and threatened a lien if he did not pay within 30 days. He paid. 2 months later, the landscaping rules were officially updated, and his shrubs were compliant under the new version. But by then, the fine was already processed and Laura refused to refund it. If this story is making you furious, smash that like button and subscribe, because it gets so much worse. I asked if he still had the paperwork. He shook his head. I threw it all out after I paid. I was so angry I did not want to look at it anymore. But I remember the notice had a signature from someone named Debra, not Laura. I asked who Debra was. He frowned. She was on the board for a year, maybe 2. She quit right after my case. I heard she had a fight with Laura about something, but I do not know the details. I thanked him, gave him my number, and told him I was reopening the case. He looked at me like I had just volunteered to jump into a wood chipper. "Good luck," he said. "You are going to need it." I drove home, mind racing. Debra. A board member who quit after a fight with Laura. That was a lead. I spent the rest of the night searching the HOA portal for board minutes from 3 years ago. I found the month Debra resigned, August 2022. The minutes from that meeting were sparse, just a line that said board member Debra Klein resigned effective immediately. No reason given, no discussion noted. I searched for any mentions of Debra in prior meetings and found her listed as Compliance Committee Chair for most of 2021 and early 2022. Then, in March 2022, there was a note about restructuring the compliance process. Laura's name appeared as the new Pool and Amenities Chair, and a footnote mentioned that Pool and Amenities would now handle access enforcement, which included driveway and parking compliance. That was the moment Laura took over the system, and 2 months later, my neighbor got hit with a fraudulent fine. I needed to talk to Debra. I found her listed in an old directory export I had saved when I first moved in. The phone number was still active. I called the next morning, expecting voicemail, but she answered. Debra Klein. I introduced myself, mentioned the HOA, and said I was investigating a compliance fraud pattern. There was a long silence, then she said, "Laura." I said yes. She let out a bitter laugh. I wondered when someone would finally call. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop parking lot nearby the next afternoon. She did not want to come to the neighborhood. She said Laura still had allies on the board and she did not trust them not to tip her off. The next day, I arrived early, parked near the back, and waited. Debra showed up 10 minutes later in a sedan, parked 2 spaces over, and walked up to my window. I got out and we stood between the cars. She was direct, no small talk. Laura has been running a shakedown for at least 4 years, maybe longer. When I was compliance chair, I started noticing patterns, fines that did not match the violation descriptions, approval requests that disappeared from the system, residents who paid penalties and then found out later the rules had changed in their favor. I brought it to the board in early 2022. Laura accused me of mismanagement and said I was covering for friends. She had 2 other board members back her up. They voted to restructure compliance and put her in charge. I resigned because I knew what was coming next. I asked if she had any records. She pulled a folder from her car and handed it to me. Copies. I kept everything. Meeting notes, emails, a spreadsheet of the discrepancies I found. I never filed a formal complaint because I did not have enough proof and I did not want to get sued. But if you are building a case, this is your foundation. I opened the folder right there and scanned the pages. Debra had documented 15 cases over an 18-month period. Each one followed the same pattern: a violation issued, a response submitted, the response either ignored or declared insufficient, a fine applied, and then later a rule change or clarification that would have cleared the resident if it had been in place at the time. In 3 cases, the resident had submitted approval requests that were never logged in the portal, But Debra had found the original submission receipts in a separate file cabinet that Laura did not know she had access to. I looked up at Debra. This is smoking gun material. Why did you not go to the state or file a complaint? She shook her head. Because the HOA is incorporated and the board has legal protection unless you can prove intent. I had patterns, but I did not have proof that Laura was doing it on purpose. She could claim it was bad record-keeping or software errors. You need something that shows deliberate fraud. A confession, a recording or documentation that proves she knew the rules and violated them anyway. I knew exactly what I needed. I needed Laura to move the goalposts on record. I needed her to contradict herself in a way that could not be explained away. And I needed it to happen in front of witnesses. I thanked Debra, took the folder, and promised to keep her updated. Then I drove home and started planning. I had 5 days until the hearing Laura had scheduled. 5 days to gather everything, set the trap, and force her to either back down or expose herself completely. I spent the first 2 days organizing. I created a master timeline that combined my case, the neighbor's case, and Debra's 15 cases. I highlighted every instance where a rule was changed or an approval was erased. I printed certified mail receipts, submission confirmations, and email threads. I added photos from Mike showing Laura blocking access, timestamps proving my driveway setup was compliant, and screenshots of the portal showing the 3 new violations that appeared out of nowhere. Then I built a second binder with just the bylaw violations, no board vote, no 10-day notice, fines over the $25 threshold. I labeled everything with tabs, color-coded the sections, and made sure every claim had at least 2 pieces of supporting evidence. On the 3rd day, my phone battery dropped to 12% while I was recording a conversation with another neighbor who had been hit with a sudden guest parking fine. I scrambled to find a charger, nearly lost the audio, and realized I needed a backup plan. I bought a second phone, a cheap prepaid model, and set it up as a dedicated recording device. I tested it that night, played back a 10-minute conversation I had with myself, and confirmed the audio was clean. I also printed a set of backup documents and stored them in my car in case Laura tried to confiscate my binder at the hearing. I was not taking any chances. On the 4th day, I got an email from the HOA management company. It was not from Laura. It was from a regional supervisor named Angela Torres. The subject line said compliance hearing postponement. I opened it and read the first line. Due to scheduling conflicts, your hearing has been moved to Monday, April 29th at 6 p.m. location, Quarry Ridge Clubhouse, main conference room. My stomach tightened. That was 8 days away, not 5. And the location had changed. I replied immediately, asking why the date and location were different from what Laura had told me. Angela responded within an hour. Board Chair Laura Sanchez requested the change to accommodate additional board member attendance. All parties have been notified. I checked my texts and emails. I had not been notified. Laura had not told me. She had just let me find out through Angela's email. That was the moment I realized Laura was stalling. She needed more time to prepare, or she was hoping I would miss the new date and she could issue a default fine. I forwarded the email to Mike, Debra, and 2 other neighbors I had talked to, asking them to be available on the 29th as witnesses if I needed them. The day before the hearing, I got a text from Mike. Laura just showed up at the property manager's office. I am here picking up a permit and she is in the back room with Angela. Thought you should know. I texted back asking if he could hear anything. He replied 5 minutes later, not much, but I heard your name and something about non-compliance escalation. Angela did not sound happy. I filed that away. If Angela was pushing back, that meant Laura was overstepping even by management company standards. That was good. That was leverage. I spent the rest of the day rehearsing. I practiced my opening statement, timed it at under 2 minutes. I walked through each piece of evidence in order, anticipating objections. I imagined Laura interrupting, accusing, deflecting. I planned responses for every scenario. By midnight, I felt ready. Not confident, but ready. I set 3 alarms for the next morning and went to bed. The hearing was at 6 p.m., but I arrived at the clubhouse at 5:15. I wanted to see the room, test the setup, and position myself before Laura could control the space. The main conference room was empty when I walked in. Long table in the center, chairs on both sides, a projector screen on the far wall. I chose a seat facing the door so I could see everyone who entered. I set my binder on the table, placed my backup phone in my pocket on record mode, and waited. Angela arrived at 5:30, carrying a laptop and a folder. She nodded at me, professional but neutral. She sat up at the head of the table and opened her laptop. A few minutes later, 2 board members arrived, both older men I recognized from community emails but had never spoken to. They sat on the opposite side. Then Laura walked in. She was wearing her white cardigan, pink visor, and carrying her glove box envelope of certified slips. She saw me, smiled tightly, and took the seat directly across from me. She set the envelope down with a deliberate slap and folded her hands on top of it. Angela started the meeting at 6 sharp. This is a compliance hearing for the property at 427 Crescent Hill Drive regarding alleged driveway use violations. The resident, present here, has requested a formal review. Laura, as the reporting compliance officer, you will present first. Laura opened her envelope and pulled out 3 notices. She laid them in a row, all facing Angela, and started talking. The resident has been operating a commercial vehicle detailing business from his driveway in violation of Section 8.4 of the Community Guidelines. He was issued warnings on March 15, March 22, and April 1. He has not responded to any of them. As of today, he owes $350 in daily fines, and he is at risk of lien action if he does not cease operations immediately. I raised my hand. Angela looked at me. You will have a chance to respond. I nodded and stayed quiet. I said almost nothing, because silence makes people talk. Laura continued, We have tried to work with him. We offered extensions. We provided copies of the guidelines. He has refused to comply and he has made this adversarial. One of the board members, a man with a gray beard, leaned forward. Do we have documentation that he received the warnings? Laura hesitated for a fraction of a second, then said, Yes, all warnings were sent certified mail. Angela asked, Do you have the receipts? Laura patted the envelope. Right here. She pulled out 3 slips, all dated within the last 2 weeks. Angela made a note. Okay. Anything else? Laura shook her head, confident. That is all I need to present. The facts are clear. He is non-compliant, and he owes the fines. Angela turned to me. Your response. I opened my binder, pulled out the first tab, and slid a copy across the table to Angela. This is my original approval letter, dated April 18, 2023, signed by the property manager at that time. It explicitly permits mobile detailing operations from my driveway as long as I comply with noise restrictions and hour limits. I have complied with both. I also have the submission receipt, the confirmation email, and a follow-up clarification from June 2023. I slid those across as well. Laura's face tightened, but she did not interrupt. Angela scanned the documents, then looked at Laura. Do you have these in your file? Laura shook her head. No, because they are not in the system. If he had an approval, it would be logged. Angela frowned, but he has the original signed letter and a receipt. Laura leaned forward. Anyone can fake a document. I need to see the original submission in the portal. I pulled out my phone, opened the cloud backup, and turned the screen toward Angela. This is a screenshot of my submission confirmation from April 2023. It includes the portal transaction ID. Angela wrote down the ID and typed it into her laptop. A moment later, her expression changed. It is in the archive. Flagged as inactive. Laura's eyes widened. That means it was revoked. Angela shook her head. No, it means it was manually moved out of the active file. There is no revocation date and no board vote authorizing the change. Laura stood up, voice rising. This is absurd. He is trying to manipulate the process. Angela raised a hand. Sit down, Laura. Laura sat, jaw clenched. Angela looked at me. Do you have any other evidence? I pulled out the next tab. This is the Community Guidelines Section 8.4 that Laura cited. It prohibits unlicensed commercial operations. I am a licensed mobile detailing business. Here is my business license, issued by Erie County, current through December 2025. I also have my liability insurance certificate and my vehicle registration showing commercial use approval. I slid all three across. Laura tried to interrupt. That does not matter. The guidelines say, Angela cut her off. The guidelines say unlicensed. He is licensed. Laura's face went red. Then, we need to update the guidelines. Angela made another note. That requires a board vote and 60 days notice to residents. You cannot retroactively enforce a rule that does not exist. I decided to push. I also want to address the fines. According to the bylaws, any fine over $25 requires a board vote and 10 days written notice before it is applied. Laura issued a $50 daily fine with no vote and no notice period. That is a direct violation of Article 12, Section 3. I pulled out the bylaw page and slid it over. The two board members looked at each other, then at Laura. One of them, the man with the beard, said, Is that true? Laura sputtered. We voted on enforcement priorities at the last meeting. That covers ongoing actions. I pulled out my phone again and opened the video I had recorded of the last board meeting, which was publicly streamed. I fast-forwarded to the enforcement discussion and played it out loud. Laura's voice came through the speaker. We will continue ongoing enforcement actions as needed. No fine amounts were discussed. No vote was called. The board member's face darkened. That is not a vote. Laura slammed her hand on the table. You are twisting everything. Angela stood up. This hearing is over. Based on the evidence presented, the resident is in compliance and has been since April 2023. The fines are rescinded and the violation notices are void. Laura, I need you to submit a written report explaining how the approval was archived without board action. I will be escalating this to the Compliance Committee for review. Laura grabbed her envelope and stood. This is not over. I decide what counts as compliant. Not you. I stayed seated, calm. That is the second time you have said that. The first time was at the Mailbox cluster 3 weeks ago when you told me you could find me daily until I give up and I cry. I have that on recording too. Would you like me to play it for the board? Laura froze. The room went silent. Angela looked at her, then at me. You recorded her? I nodded. She made those statements in a public area with witnesses present. One-party consent state. It is legal. Angela closed her laptop. Laura, leave. Now. We will handle this separately. Laura turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. The two board members sat in stunned silence. One of them finally said, How long has this been going on? I pulled out Debra's folder. At least 4 years. And I can prove it. Over the next 30 minutes I walked them through the timeline. 15 cases, all following the same pattern. Approvals erased, rules changed mid-enforcement, fines applied without votes, residents pressured into paying to avoid liens. I showed them the spreadsheet Debra had compiled, the emails where Laura accused her of mismanagement, the restructuring vote that put Laura in charge of compliance. I showed them the neighbor's case from 3 years ago, the one where Laura changed the landscaping rules verbally and then issued a fine before the new rules were published. I showed them my case where Laura backdated 3 violations and tried to collect fines for actions that were approved 2 years ago. By the time I finished, both board members looked ill. The man with the beard said, "We need to call an emergency meeting." Angela nodded. "I will notify the management company's legal team. This is beyond my authority." I handed her a USB drive. "Everything is on here. Timeline, evidence, recordings, supporting documents. I also have copies stored off-site in case anything happens to the originals." Angela took the drive and left. The board members stayed for a few more minutes, asking questions, taking notes. Then they left too. I sat alone in the conference room, staring at the empty chairs. I had done it. I had forced the issue into the open. But I knew Laura was not done. People like her do not go quietly. I packed up my binder, checked my phone, and saw 3 missed calls from Mike. I called him back. He answered immediately. "You need to see this. Laura just tried to corner Angela in the parking lot. I recorded the whole thing. She was screaming about defamation and threatening to sue the management company. Angela told her to leave or she would call the police. Laura got in her car and peeled out. Where are you now?" "Still at the clubhouse." "I will send you the video." He hung up and 30 seconds later the video came through. I watched it twice. Laura's face was twisted in fury, finger jabbing at Angela, voice shrill and cracking. Angela stood with her arms crossed, completely calm, and said, "You are no longer authorized to act as a compliance officer. Any further contact will be considered harassment." Then she turned and walked away. Laura stood there for a moment, visibly shaking, before getting into her car and slamming the door so hard I thought the window would crack. I saved the video and added it to the evidence folder. 3 days later, I got an email from Angela. The board had held an emergency meeting. Laura was removed from all committee positions effective immediately. The compliance process was being audited by an outside firm. All fines issued in the last 2 years were under review. Residents who had paid penalties during that period would be contacted for possible refunds. And the board was voting on a formal apology letter to be sent to everyone affected. I read the email twice, then forwarded it to Debra, Mike, and the neighbor from the north side. Debra called me within minutes. "You did it. I did not think anyone would ever actually hold her accountable." I told her it was her documentation that made it possible. She laughed, a real laugh this time, not bitter. "Maybe, but you were the one who had the guts to push it all the way." We talked for a few more minutes, then she said she was going to reach out to the board about rejoining as an advisor for the audit process. I encouraged her to do it. The HOA needed people like her, people who actually cared about fairness. The next week, I received a formal letter from the board. It was short, 2 paragraphs, but it said everything I needed to hear. The board acknowledged that compliance enforcement procedures had been mishandled, that my approval had been valid and improperly archived, and that I was owed an apology for the stress and inconvenience caused. The letter was signed by all 5 board members. I framed it and hung it in my office. Not because I was proud, but because I wanted to remember what it took to get there. A few days after that, I got a check in the mail. It was a refund for the neighbor who had paid the landscaping fine 3 years ago. He called me that night, voice thick with emotion. I did not think I would ever see this money again. "Thank you." I told him he did not need to thank me. He had been part of the case too, even if he did not know it at the time. His story had been one of the clues that helped me connect everything. Laura did not disappear, but she did go quiet. I saw her once at the Mailbox cluster a few weeks later. She did not say anything, just grabbed her mail and walked away. No envelope, no visor, no threats. It felt anticlimactic, but also final. She had lost her power, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it. The audit results came back in June. The outside firm found systemic issues with record-keeping, inadequate board oversight, and evidence of selective enforcement targeting specific residents. They recommended policy changes, mandatory training for all board members, and quarterly compliance audits going forward. The board voted to accept all recommendations. The HOA attorney who had been advising Laura during the enforcement actions withdrew mid-crisis, put it in writing, and the board panicked because they had to answer homeowners with no cover. That forced them to settle several pending cases immediately and issue written retractions for dozens of disputed fines. One afternoon in early July, I was washing a client's car in my driveway when a woman I did not recognize walked up. She introduced herself as a new board member, elected in the special election that followed Laura's removal. She said she had read the audit report and wanted to thank me personally for reopening the case. A lot of people were hurt by what happened, and you gave them a way to get justice. I appreciated the sentiment, but I told her the real credit belonged to Debra, Mike, and everyone who had kept records and refused to let the story die. She nodded, then handed me a folder. "This is the final compliance audit for your property. Everything is clear. No violations, no pending actions, no notes. You are officially compliant in every category." I took the folder and thanked her. She walked away, and I stood there for a moment. Folder in hand, sun on my face, feeling something I had not felt in months. Relief. The cold case was closed. But the story was not over. Other neighborhoods in the region started reaching out, asking for advice on how to audit their own HOA compliance systems. Deborah and I put together a template that residents could use to request records, identify patterns, and escalate issues to management companies or state regulators. We published it online, free to download, and within a month it had been shared across dozens of HOA forums. People sent us their own stories, some worse than mine, some eerily similar. It became clear that Laura was not an anomaly. She was just one example of a much larger problem: HOA boards with too much power, too little oversight, and no real accountability. But every story also had the same solution: documentation, persistence, and the willingness to fight back within the system. I kept working my mobile detailing business, kept my driveway clear, kept my records organized. I never got another violation notice from Quarry Ridge HOA Incorporated. The new board ran a tight ship, transparent and procedural, and residents actually started attending meetings again because they trusted the process. It was not perfect, but it was better. And that was enough. One evening in late August, I was sitting on my porch when Mike pulled up in his truck. He got out, walked over, and handed me a six-pack. "Heard you closed another case in Rochester, some guy with a shed dispute." I laughed. It was not that dramatic. Just helped him find the approval paperwork his HOA claimed did not exist. Mike grinned. "You are like the HOA whisperer now." I shook my head. I just know how to read a paper trail. We sat there for a while, talking about nothing important, watching the sun go down over the Quarry Ridge development. It felt normal. It felt quiet. It felt like I had finally reclaimed the peace that Laura had tried to take away. But I kept the binder. I kept the recordings. I kept the evidence folder backed up in 3 places. Because I knew that people like Laura were still out there, in other neighborhoods, running the same schemes, targeting the same vulnerable residents. And I knew that someday, someone else would need to reopen a cold case. When that happened, I wanted to be ready. Not because I enjoyed the fight, but because I had learned something important through all of this. The only way to stop a bully is to meet them with the one thing they cannot manipulate. The truth, in writing, with witnesses, and a paper trail they cannot erase. That was the lesson. That was the takeaway. And that was why I would never throw away my evidence, no matter how much time passed. Because in an HOA, the past is never really over. It is just waiting for someone to dig it back up. The months that followed were quiet, in the best way. I took on more clients, expanded my mobile detailing business, and even hired a part-time assistant to help with the busier weekends. The renovation schedule I had been worried about stayed on track, and I hit every deadline without interference. My driveway stayed clear, my phone stayed silent. No more certified letters, no more violation notices, no more surprise fees. It felt surreal at first, like waiting for the other shoe to drop, but eventually I got used to it. This was what normal was supposed to feel like. This was what I had been fighting for all along. Debra rejoined the board as the new compliance committee chair. She implemented a digital tracking system that logged every approval request, every notice, and every board vote in real time. Residents could access their own records through the portal, and any changes required administrator approval with an audit trail. It was not foolproof, but it was a hell of a lot better than what we had before. She also pushed for quarterly town halls where residents could ask questions and raise concerns directly to the board. Attendance was high. People wanted to be heard, and for the first time in years they felt like someone was actually listening. Mike and I stayed in touch. He referred more clients my way, and I helped him navigate a permit issue with the city that had been dragging on for months. We grabbed beers every few weeks, usually at the same spot near the coffee shop where I had met Debra. It became our unofficial debrief location, the place where we swapped stories and laughed about how ridiculous the whole thing had been. But we never forgot how serious it was either. We had both seen what happens when unchecked power meets a broken system. We had both seen people give up because they did not think they could win. And we had both learned that you can win, as long as you are willing to document everything and refuse to back down. The neighbor from the north side, the one who had paid the landscaping fine, became one of my biggest advocates. He told everyone in his building about what had happened, and suddenly I had a wave of new clients who wanted to support a business that had stood up to the HOA. It was not charity. My work was good, and my prices were fair. But the goodwill did not hurt, and it reminded me that communities can heal when people decide to support each other instead of tearing each other down. In September, I got an email from a reporter at a local news station. She had heard about the audit results and wanted to do a story on HOA accountability. I agreed to an interview, but I made it clear that the story was not about me. It was about the system. It was about Debra, Mike, the neighbors who had been hurt, and the changes that had been implemented to prevent it from happening again. The segment aired 2 weeks later. It was fair, balanced, and it hit hard. They interviewed Debra, showed clips of the board meetings, and included statements from residents who had been affected. Laura was not named directly, but anyone who lived in Quarry Ridge knew exactly who they were talking about. The station got calls from other neighborhoods across Buffalo, all asking the same question: how do we audit our HOA? Debra and I ended up doing a follow-up interview where we walked through the template we had created and explained how residents could protect themselves. It felt good to turn something painful into something useful. Laura moved out of Quarry Ridge in October. I heard about it through the neighborhood grapevine, the kind of whispered conversations that happen at mailbox clusters and front porches. No one knew where she went, and no one seemed to care. Her departure was not dramatic. No big confrontation, no final showdown, no explosive exit. She just packed up, listed her unit, and left. The new owner was a young couple with a toddler. They smiled when I waved, and they never once mentioned the HOA. That felt like progress. The units sold fast, and the neighborhood moved on. It was like Laura had been erased, not by force but by irrelevance. She had built her power on fear and control, and once that was gone, there was nothing left. She was just another person who had lived there once, someone people barely remembered. I kept my evidence binder in my office, filed on a shelf between tax records and client invoices. I did not need it anymore, but I was not ready to throw it away. It was a reminder of what I had been through, what I had learned, and what I had won. It was proof that the system could work if you forced it to. And it was a warning to myself: never assume that compliance means safety. Never assume that rules will be followed just because they are written down. And never ever assume that someone in a position of authority is acting in good faith. Trust, but verify. Document, but act. That was the code I lived by now, and it had not let me down yet. The HOA board continued to improve. They passed new bylaws that required compliance officers to be independent contractors, not board members. They implemented mandatory bias training for anyone in a leadership role. They published monthly financial reports so residents could see exactly where their dues were going. And they established a resident ombudsman, someone who could mediate disputes before they escalated into hearings or legal action. None of it was perfect, but all of it was better. And that was the point. You do not fix a broken system overnight. You chip away at it, one policy at a time, one vote at a time, one case at a time. And eventually, if enough people care, the system starts to bend. I saw Debra at a town hall in November. She was presenting the latest compliance audit results, and the room was packed. Residents actually applauded when she finished, something I had never seen at an HOA meeting before. Afterward, she pulled me aside and thanked me again. I told her she did not need to keep thanking me. She smiled and said, "I am not thanking you for what you did. I am thanking you for showing people that they do not have to accept broken systems. That is a bigger gift than you realize." I did not know what to say to that, so I just nodded. She was right, though. The fight had not just been about my driveway or my business or even Laura. It had been about proving that ordinary people, armed with nothing but documentation and persistence, could hold power accountable. That was the real cold case. Not a mystery to solve, but a system to fix. And we had done it. Not alone, and not perfectly, but we had done it. As the year wound down, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The mailbox confrontation, the hearing, the recordings, the audit, the retractions, the refunds, the new policies, the quiet, unglamorous victory of a system that finally worked the way it was supposed to. It had been exhausting, infuriating, and at times completely overwhelming. But it had also been worth it. Because at the end of the day, I had won. Not by cheating, not by bending the rules, but by using the system against itself. By being more prepared, more organized, and more stubborn than the people who thought they could intimidate me into silence. And now, months later, I could look back and see the full picture. Laura had not been a monster. She had been a bully with a system that enabled her. The HOA had not been corrupt. It had been negligent, lazy, and willing to let one person run unchecked because it was easier than doing the work. And the neighborhood had not been complicit. It had been scared, exhausted, and convinced that fighting back would only make things worse. But once someone stood up, once someone refused to accept the status quo, everything changed. That was the lesson I carried forward. Not that you can win every fight, but that you can win enough of them to matter. Not that systems are fair, but that you can force them to be fairer. Not that justice is guaranteed, but that it is possible if you are willing to work for it. And that, more than anything, was what I wanted people to take away from my story. You do not have to be a lawyer. You do not have to be rich. You do not have to be fearless. You just have to be willing to document, to persist, and to demand accountability. The rest will follow. I appreciate you spending your time with me, and I will be back soon.